Welcome to Tim Butchart. Tim has led many organizations to remarkable revenue growth, and particularly in the tech sector, in SaaS, AI, cybersecurity, and fintech. So welcome, Tim. We're going to be talking about your experience handling revenue growth, high value accounts, and scaling. And you've done that both through organic and through mergers and acquisitions. Tim, your insights are invaluable for anyone in the tech sector looking to take their business to the next level. So a very big welcome to you. Thank you for joining us, Tim.
Awesome. Tim, great to have you on the podcast. Thanks for jumping on. It'd be great if perhaps you could just expand on your intro, or maybe if you wanted to just sort of share a bit of a background for our listeners.
I joined a major American-based software hardware company as a graduate trainee. And after a year's worth of training, so I went back to the office on the Monday, saw my boss and said, "This is wonderful, a year's training." And he said, "Well, Tim, have you ever been to the States?" I was, "Well, once. I've been to Disneyland or somewhere." And he sponsored me to go over to Silicon Valley, and that's really shaped my career. And then at some point, I think many people in particularly technology vendors, they kind of figure out that if you really want to move up the career ladder, you have to be a salesperson, at least know how to sell. I was fortunate to go through what I would call old school sales training. I was in the fortunate position to come back to Europe and work in various parts of the world. But the actual basic execution of articulating value to customers, differentiating what you have, delivering on that value, and then building the teams and motivating and educating the teams. These are skills that everybody needs. So that's really where I spend the majority of my time, helping organizations grow their revenue, both from sales and marketing skills, but also people, cultural and motivational challenges along the way.
Awesome. Sounds like you've had a very varied and interesting career across the pond and back over here in Europe too.
Yeah, it's been great fun. I think you find people in different countries have different motivations, how they want to work. And I think key leadership challenge is how do you motivate people from different backgrounds and cultures, but still create that one company culture.
Definitely. And how did you find that culture changed across when you were working over in the States compared to the culture you'd seen in companies over in Europe?
I've always found that in the US, there's a lot more of a desire to almost kind of sometimes walk through walls. Barriers are not something to worry about. You just smash through them. Everybody talks about that failure in the US is not a bad thing. I think in sales and marketing roles in technology companies, people move a lot faster and take a lot more risks. There's a great adage, fail quickly and early. And when you look at some European countries, particularly maybe more sort of Central European-based companies, there's a different approach. I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's maybe things are tested a lot more and a little bit more slower and more thought out pace. So it's a real challenge, I think, trying to blend the best of all the different cultures. Because when you're scaling a technology company, maybe you get the first few wins and they probably come through, I call it sort of friends and family, but it's really working at network. It's people and you get to a point where the company really needs to scale and get a process, figure out who your ideal customer is. And when people start trying to expand across these different countries, different geographies, if you don't have that pretty well laid out, the different cultures in the company. So if you hire your first general manager in Germany, and then you've got your next one in Sydney, and somebody else in the UK, they're always all going to operate differently, which is fine, but you've got to be very careful you don't end up with 3 or 4 different companies all moving in different directions. So I think that's one of the key sort of cultural aspects to think about.
And I guess to dive into that in a bit more detail, you've worked at some companies that would be backed by PE, and they're generally pretty renowned for increasing the performance of a business, being quite very ruthless in terms of efficiency and outcomes. How did you find that affected the culture of the companies that you worked in, and how that maybe changed the leadership culture as well?
I think PEs do an amazing job. PEs definitely invest in companies, bring some growth capital. Obviously, PEs also look at how can we grow a company organically, but also how can we be additive in terms of provide add-ons. So, for example, if you have a PE-backed customer, PE-backed vendor, maybe they have a big customer set, well, they can grow that revenue via great execution, organic growth. But then, if you've got that customer set, you have those relationships. Why not go and provide more technology, more solutions to those customers. So then you have to take the view, well, do you develop the code if it's software developed yourself, or would it be quicker and more additive to provide some add-ons? So then you have your issues with companies joining together, but then you mustn't forget that PEs quite correctly are investors, and they are looking for a return probably over quite a defined period of time. So quite rightly, they are pushing for fantastic execution. And as a leadership team, the chief executive and his team, it's often an inflection point where maybe the growth rate was 30%, but the PE will have put together a thesis with support from the management team that says we're going to grow at 50% or 60%. And that growth has to come from best practice execution. Is one thing. You're probably going to have to make some changes in terms of your execution to figure out some different routes to market. But clearly, if that leadership cannot meet those growth objectives, then there will be changes, and people will come and go. I think it's up to the leadership team to work very closely with their investors and set realistic, not just objectives around growth, but timescales and how they're going to get there. So I think PEs do bring a different level of oversight, but I think that's a really good thing because it often forces management teams to effectively up their game, but can be casualties along the way.
For sure.
When you work with leadership teams, Tim, and often in the role of a CRO, what is it that you look for in modern leaders of today? What makes you think he's a great leader, she's a great leader, and this is a business I'd like to work with? What do you look for? What are the key attributes of great leaders?
So in any kind of generating revenue, generating margin, I think there's some clear leadership skills that these kind of everybody should have. And it comes down, they need to be able to demonstrate they can set a clear vision and align the team. A vision is something that everybody coalesces around. Aligning the team is not telling people, it is getting people to internalize, really buy into that vision. The next piece is if you're a leader, you've got to what value you're going to add. How are you going to build a scalable revenue engine? Scalable doesn't mean I'm just going to hire more people and the magic happens. Your scalability comes from really understanding who your customers are going to be, what's the playbook, what type of people you're going to hire. So you've got to look at the whole sales, marketing, and product process together. So a good leader should be able to articulate that. And then the key piece is obviously people. Do they invest in people? Do they know how to hire the right people? How do they build a culture? So once you got the people piece nailed, then you've got to think about, okay, so ultimately all companies have got to figure out what is the customer value they're delivering. And I think sometimes revenue leaders get very focused on the selling part, and they forget that the customer is not interested in being sold to. The customer is interested in realizing value, and how quickly does that value manifest itself? So time to value. So a leader has to keep the whole company focused on not just sales, marketing, product, and finance. What is the value we're delivering to that customer? How are we articulating it, and how are we getting the whole organization, not just the people that in a CRO's role, not just the people that directly report to the CRO, which is normally marketing, customer success, and sales. How do they align the whole broader organization around delivering that value? And I think that the last piece is technology companies by nature change. Technology companies got to be one of the fastest moving industries that we have. Just look at all the talk about AI right now. Companies that I'm leading now or assisting, everybody's now talking about AI. And in some reasons it's relevant, some reasons it's not. But a leader needs to be able to lead that company with confidence through uncertainty, because a lot of the technology companies, some people see AI as an opportunity, some people see it as a threat. So the leader, in order to keep the whole organization focused on the value they're delivering, to the end customers is deal with the uncertainty, but lead that whole organization on a continuous path to the success thereafter. But keep looking out for the opportunities, dealing with the side winds and the uncertainties. I mean, there are a few suggestions I think that are pretty much top of mind for me.
I'm just going to recap those for our audience, because you talked about creating that clear vision at the beginning, adding value, and the speed of being able to add value for clients. People side, having that culture where everybody's bought into the vision and behaving, I guess, to values and living and breathing the culture. And then the fourth one being kind of being able to be adaptive, drive through uncertainty, and to manage change. I'd like Tim just to go into the aspects of adding value. I think is a really great point that you've raised here. If you were going to give some tips to our listeners around how do you demonstrate that value to prospects in a succinct way, what steps would you advise them to take?
So when technology companies, they're speaking to organizations or a number of cohorts they're dealing with. It could be the CEO, it could be the business unit leader. They've got some imperative business issues. It could be their stock price is reduced, maybe they've got profit issues, maybe they've got customer satisfaction, they've got customer churn issues. So what's the value that we as an organization are delivering there? And it could be an ERP, an enterprise resource planning piece of software. It could be an HR piece of software. The value that you're delivering to that person, who's, we're calling the economic buyer. He's the person or he or she ultimately signs the check and actually maybe authorizes the project to happen or not. What's the value with the organization and delivering to that person? But then if you look at technology, then you also have other factors. You can have an IT organization, you can have a digital transformation organization, you can have a finance organization. All those different parts of that company are all involved in putting in or selecting that piece of software, trying to fix that issue. A leader has to figure out and make sure his team are delivering and articulating the value to all those different cohorts. So a leader has to make sure that are your sales and marketing team, are your product team thinking about all the people involved in that decision, in that process. Now, the key piece is, okay, you've sold your technology, and more often than not, this technology is not a one hit. It is implemented. It may take months. It may take years to implement. You may be working with partner consulting companies as well. So you're now involved in an ecosystem of multiple stakeholders within the end customer. You may have third-party partners, in implementation partners, and you've got your own a leader of these businesses has to not just think about their business, think about the whole ecosystem and make sure everybody's aligned. Now you're leading. You've sold some value. You're leading the implementation of that value. Then you've got to realize the value. Well, I think what people often forget is who's going back to that organization and all the stakeholders after the event and say, have we delivered the value that we said we would? Now, people ask, well, why is that important? It's very important because a good organization may want to provide further software and services and hardware to that company. You're not going to do that if you don't realize that value. Realizing the value is not just have we delivered what we said we were going to do. It's going back and proving it in dollars, pounds, euros. This is what we said we would do. Have we made those savings or increased your revenue or whatever the deliverables are? The other piece that I think is super important is I'm a firm believer that everything is people used to say moving to software as a service. I now think everything is a service. So what that means is you're not providing a solution and walking away. That customer can very easily, other than the sort of cost of change, it's quite easy for them to say, I don't no longer want that solution. I'm going to move somewhere else. So the churn is very high. So do organizations think about what are we doing to retain that customer and grow that customer? It's very easy now for organizations to move somewhere else. So there's quite a lot to consider there, but I think all leadership roles are ultimately about delivering value to the customers, delivering value to your shareholders, and delivering value to your employees or your colleagues. Because as a company grows and it morphs and changes, people, quite rightly, people want to move around. They want to move around for different opportunities. What value are you delivering to your staff and your colleagues and your everybody in the organization to help them grow, help them meet their objectives. So I think the old days of maybe people thinking you just turn up and you go and sell something and walk away. I think there's far more to leadership than that in any kind of sales and marketing type company.
Well, thank you. I would call that transactional, where we're trying to make it transformational and understand did that transformation continue once the initial sale has been made.
Yep.
And I love your point about value to everybody, all stakeholders, including providers.
100%. And that's where I often think that great sort of sales marketing led customers, you talk about customer success and you making sure the customer sees the value. But I often wonder, do these organizations actually look at their own teams? Again, particularly in the technology environment, the volume of particularly salespeople that cycle through organizations, and some of that's expected, maybe opportunities elsewhere, but I wonder if that churn is so high is because are leaders thinking enough about the value that they are helping create for their salespeople? And it's not just about how much commission. What really drives that salesperson? Is it the thrill of the win? Is it building a team? What is it? And I think if leaders don't understand that and don't meet their colleagues' requirements, then you end up with more churn. You end up hiring more people, training more people. You cycle through relationships with your customers. So I think it's a huge issue if people don't consider all of the above.
And there's a massive cost attached to that, which I don't think is often really fully evaluated. The cost of losing talent, knowledge. Customers have to get to learn a new, work with a new person, learn the cost of recruitment and time that takes.
It's absolutely massive. If you just think about the life cycle, so somebody says, I'm planning on leaving. Okay, so now instantly that person's less motivated. So maybe they're working the notice period, so you're losing productivity there. And you've got to go and find somebody else. Maybe you can promote somebody internally. Maybe you've got to hire externally. And you've got how long is that? They're going to take that person to get up to speed. And the statistics say, that's 6 months to a year to get productive, let alone all the relationships that your outgoing person had. I'm a big advocate of use your CRM tools, use all the digital assistance that's there, but you do lose a huge amount of relationships and knowledge. So really looking after and keeping your customer facing team in place and motivated is absolutely critical to growth.
That's a very good note on which to kind of draw to a close, Tim. Thank you. It's been very insightful having a conversation with you. Just as we wrap up, what has been one big challenge, the biggest challenge perhaps in your career that you've wrestled with and came through it? What did you learn from that and what was the challenge?
I've got plenty of scars and challenges, and I think all of them are good. One of my biggest challenges, I was in a large US-based technology company around 2008. It had been taken off the public markets, been bought by a large private fund. Unfortunately, they'd over-leveraged themselves, so we had to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Those of you who are not familiar with Chapter 11 bankruptcy, it's not the end of the company. It's just a way to restructure the company. However, it does produce a huge amount of uncertainty with both your customers who think you may be going out of business, your suppliers who are wondering if they're going to get paid, and all your staff who are thinking, do I have a job? And I remember getting a call on a Sunday night from the CFO in the US saying, look, we got off to the course in New York. It's we're going to file for Chapter 11, but it's called a pre-package. So we go to the course, recapitalize the company, and off we go. but explaining that to colleagues in the business, customers, and suppliers is super tricky. Now, what it does do is it hones your skills, I think, in terms of communication and being very frank. But what you find in those sort of levels, in that sort of adversity where customers could walk away and say this is too risky, you very quickly find that you can explain this to people. And if you are frank, open, and honest, you say, look, it's not a position we really want to be in, you'd be quite amazed at how everybody rises to the challenge. We didn't lose one customer. Competitors came after us left, right, and center, and staff and everybody just knuckled down, and we came out of it a much, much stronger company. So not the adversity I was planning on, but definitely a learning experience. I think anybody who's thinks their company's having a tough time, I think they'll be surprised that always lights at the end of the tunnel and always bumps that have to be dealt with.
On that inspiring note, inspiring end to a challenge, Tim, thank you. How can our listeners and our viewers get in touch with you?
Best thing is LinkedIn, Tim Butchart. I'm there. I post a reasonable amount, but that's the best way. I do respond very quickly. I do work with a large bunch of scale-up companies, particularly in the UK and to some extent in the US. And I do enjoy assisting people, whether that be chief executives, CROs, or sales and marketing people. So do get in touch. I'm happy to help or introduce you to anybody that I can. Thank you very
Tim,
much for your time.
Thanks so much for being on the podcast, Tim. Really great to have a chat with you.
Great stuff. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.